Hello, lovelies. It's Fiona here from Harley's Street Emporium, and we are just waiting for the very lovely Kate Pleace to join us, and we will be talking about fertility and a whole bunch of things that impact upon it. So here she is. Hello, gorgeous. How are you?
To manipulate the technology, but I think I've got it working now. I'm quite impressed.
Perfect. There you go. There you go. Welcome to StreamYard, as they say. This is it's an interesting piece of technology. It's sending out simultaneously to YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, but not to Instagram, very strangely. So anyway, there
Oh,
you go. There you go. I
the
don't
joys of it. Technology never does what you think it will do, though, does it?
know. That's very, very true.
But
Very,
I'm
very
just
true.
pleased that we're both on and talking, because for a minute it took me to another screen, and I was like, oh, where will it be taking me? What will be happening?
Exactly. But actually, I find it easier to use than Zoom. So
Oh,
yeah, I think it's good. But anyway, let me get to the point because we are talking to the very lovely Kate Pleace, who is a senior nurse who spent, gosh, many, many, many years in fertility. You've recently done your master's in reproductive health. You're now doing a PhD looking at real life experiences of premature menopause. And we are talking tonight about all the sorts of things that impact upon fertility because it's a really it's a very personal and can be very difficult journey for some people, which is an interesting thing really, isn't it? Because a whole bunch of people find it incredibly easy to get pregnant, but a whole lot of people really don't. Do we know why that is?
there's the answer is, Fiona. There's a lot of different reasons. We know that not about sort of 6% of the population are likely to need some form of fertility assistance or fertility treatment. So it's a lot lower than you think. But particularly for patients going through their fertility journey, it seems like, oh, it's only me or it's everyone. But yeah, it's around 6%. But when we think about it in a pie chart, we can imagine that pie chart, and it's probably equal amounts for what we would say would be male factor, female factor, and then there's a proportion of what we would refer to as, and this is the word I really hate, unexplained infertility, which means that we've done all of our tests, they're all come back normal for the couple, but we can't actually give them a specific diagnosis. There's obviously genetic causes, other medical conditions. So you kind of had that pie chart of possible different indications. And I think a lot of the time back in the past, people obviously thought it was usually, must be just a women's issue. But when we break it out into women and men, it's about the same amount. So when we talk about male factor fertility, we might talk about low sperm count, different shaped sperm morphology that's abnormal. We might talk about medical conditions. We might talk about testicular surgery or other conditions that have impacted genetic conditions. And then we think about female factor fertility. We might think about endocrinology, so things like polycystic ovaries. We might think about surgery or blocked fallopian tubes. We might think about other conditions, fibroids, endometriosis. So there's lots and lots of potentially different causes for both male and female factor. And that cause that we've talked about, the unknown, where at the moment we don't know what that is.
Yeah, it's interesting you said about 6% because earlier I was reading some stats from America, and I think they said it was around about 15% and growing. Do we know any reason? I mean, are there environmental reasons that could cause that figure to be starting to grow? Have we got any idea?
We've got lots of things. What we do know is that women, particularly with women, age is a really important factor in our fertility. When we think of ourselves, I'm in my early 40s. I still imagine, I'm 20 and I'm too scared to take, a jersey back to the shop in case the assistant tells me off. So I'm still feeling young in my 40s. But reproductively, our reproductive system hasn't changed in thousands of years. So we have this almost reproductive journey that's individual to each of us. There's the time factor and there's that individuality. So there's the age factor. We know that more women are having children later in life, in their 30s and early 40s, which impacts. And we also know, obviously, of more things coming to light. There's lots of research done on the lifestyle that we're living that plays a really big part of it. Fertility education, environmental factors such as pollution and air quality, whilst there's not enough evidence to say, yes, it could happen. I think more and more is going to come out as we're doing more research.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, then, are there things that can actually help in terms of lifestyle that would help improve our chances of getting pregnant?
Absolutely, and often I see ladies or couples for fertility consults, and often they're coming in very early in their journey, so they may not have seen a medical professional or their doctor at this point. And actually focusing on lifestyle and other factors is really important. Think of it as little things that come together that can make a big difference. And a lot of things you think, oh, I know I've got to be doing that. But for instance, we know for women, if you're if you've got a high BMI, that may impact on ovulation. You may not ovulate each month, your overall health, and your risk for pregnancy if you're overweight. So we have those options. We have things like smoking and alcohol. Whilst we would never say to someone, you can't do that. We know particularly that smoking is very important, particularly for egg and sperm quality. And we know obviously that alcohol is an endocrine disruptor. When we talk about it on the menopause side, we know it influences symptoms because it's interfering with your hormones. We also know healthy lifestyle, all the things we know we should be doing. So a good balanced diet, plenty of fruit and vegetables, protein, making sure you're getting a good balanced diet, getting a good amount of sleep, very important. We know that potentially ladies who struggle with their sleep may impact on their hormones. We know quite a lot about that. We also obviously know about the importance of diet and lifestyle in terms of being active, exercise, but not just for physically and maintaining weight, but also for mental support. And I think the other one that isn't connected to lifestyle but is really important is having a support group, because a lot of patients don't talk to anyone about important issues. So having family or friends that you can talk to or knowing where you can seek support is also an important part of that. All those things coming together that can make a big difference.
Yeah, God, there's a lot of stuff there, isn't there? A lot of meat in that sandwich that a lot of people probably don't really think about. I mean, you don't really think about smoking all that much as having any effect on anything apart from your lungs and your skin. You don't really think about your alcohol having much of an effect. You know that it can make your hot sweats worse and that kind of stuff, but you don't really think about it on you in terms of other areas. But there's a lot to think about there. And you mentioned diet and things like that, but I will come back later on to the very large and burgeoning market that has grown around these kinds of things. We'll deal with that later, but there are also various conditions. You mentioned PCOS there. What other sorts of conditions and fibroids, what other sorts of things can impact on fertility?
So from the female side, we've talked about polycystic ovaries, which is a hormone imbalance that affects endocrinology in terms of symptoms such as irregular periods, weight gain, insulin resistance, acne, hair in unwanted places. We also have endometriosis for women. So that's when the cells that are very similar to the lining of the womb, that should be just in the lining of the womb, actually grow in different places of the body. So it starts, often it's quite common in other areas in the pelvis, in the ovaries, but potentially in the bowel, in the bladder, and then other areas in the body. So that makes potentially periods very painful. It makes them very heavy. Ladies get lots of other symptoms. And we also know for some ladies with endometriosis, there's a very strong link to what we would call ovarian reserve and egg quality. We don't know enough to say, well, what's going on there, but we do see that. So there is that impact on fertility. But we also know with these ladies, and I was doing a community talk yesterday where I live in North Essex, we know that for a lot of ladies with endometriosis, the average waiting time to be diagnosed is anything up to about 6 years. So
I thought it was around about 7 to 12.
Yeah, it's scary, isn't it? You think they'll often visit their GPs or healthcare professionals many times, and symptoms can be attributed to lots of things. So a lady who was talking last night was saying how her symptoms were attributed to IBS. So but to go through that such a long journey to get that diagnosis, and as we were saying, not everyone who has endometriosis is affected by difficulties conceiving, but we know potentially that can impact with some of those things that I've mentioned. So we've talked about polycystic ovaries, we've talked about endometriosis. We also have my specialist subject, which would be a premature or an early menopause. So you could be a lady in your 20s, 30s, and actually it's very common that sometimes that's diagnosed when patients are trying to conceive, because often patients are using contraception that masks symptoms, or takes away your periods, so you don't have that kind of symptoms or changes in periods to sort of come to the forefront. So often they'll come off their contraception, they'll start to try to conceive, and then potentially, obviously that's not happening. They may experience symptoms, they may experience problems with their periods, go for further investigations, and often can get a diagnosis of what we would refer to as premature ovarian insufficiency, so a menopause before the age of 40. And that can make your fertility journey a little bit more specialised.
Absolutely. If women in that sort of situation, if they've come off the pill and it's taking, a couple of years or something, at what point do you suddenly think, gee, there might be something wrong here?
It's very much, I always look at couples or individuals, on that individual basis. But if you've been trying to conceive, depending your age for women, as I said, is very important. But if you've been trying to conceive for 6 months to a year, nothing's happening, or I've had ladies where their periods haven't returned and then there's no periods at all. For me, that would be saying, well, we need to find out why. We need to do investigations to check what's happening. So we're actually looking at the whole couple as a whole, but we're thinking, well, hold on a minute, if you stopped your pill 8 months ago and there's been no period and you're starting to get some of the symptoms that we know a lot when we talk about our menopause side of things, my brain would be thinking, right, we need to do some tests. But also things like family history. So I was talking to a lady on Sunday who had several members of her family who all went through premature menopause around their late 30s. So family history, we know, is very important when we talk about patient history and premature menopause.
Wow. And if somebody's in those sorts of situations, what options do they have? What are their chances of conceiving naturally, and what options do they have if they're very small?
So the difference with premature ovarian insufficiency, why that's different to when a lady goes through menopause at the expected age, is that potentially ovarian function can be what we call spontaneous or intermittent. So whilst we're saying, yes, potentially you're going through a premature menopause, your ovaries, haven't completely left the building, so we say, for some women. So there is always a chance of a spontaneous ovulation or a natural pregnancy. So believe it or not, we do still have to counsel ladies about contraception and about, where they're feeling, what they want to do in their journey. So a chance of a conception is low, about 5%. But for some ladies, whilst it's rare, it happens. Obviously, some ladies will want to try naturally or to pursue fertility treatment using their own eggs. But we know potentially that if we were to say, well, what gives us the best success rates? I don't like to say numbers because we're people, but what do the numbers tell us? And we know for some ladies that thinking about treatment using donor eggs or egg donation can dramatically improve success rates on a cycle. And that can be quite scary because you think, oh, I'm not really familiar with egg donation. It's a lot to get my head around. But clinics are excellent in supporting you, offering you implications counselling, guiding you through the process. It's not, well, Friday, I've decided I'm having it, Saturday I'm having the treatment. They'll match you with a donor. And it's because of the age of the donor, and it's because of that egg quality that gives you that increase in success rates and chances. But also timescale wise, you're kind of off the hook because as women, we're always told about our age, aren't we? And we have to be mindful of when we're conceiving and our age. We have to think about what we're planning, just to add to our ever-growing list of everything else. Yep. But actually, if we're having donor eggs, then that kind of takes that away because the age of the donor is critical and the donor will be screened and accordingly to guidelines. Whereas for me as a recipient, it doesn't affect me so much because it's not as important. Clinics will still have a guideline on how old you can be, but you don't have to do that whole roller coaster rushing in.
Yeah. You mentioned support there in the clinics and stuff. I mean, obviously, you need an awful lot of emotional support going through this. Do the clinics provide the emotional side as well, or are there other support groups that people can turn to if they think, I need help here?
I think that's a really important part, Fiona. And I ran an egg donation program for many years, and it was very much a double-edged sword. You'd be, as a patient, you'd be waiting and waiting for that call to say that we'd found a lady for you, because often there would be a waiting list because you're asking another lady to come forward to go through IVF treatment, whether that's for her own cycle to share her eggs for treatment, or whether they're doing that altruistically because they want to help. So that in itself isn't a quick process. So you're waiting for that. You're waiting for a match to be a similar match to you or the requirements that we can offer. And obviously that takes time. So the clinics do support you. They often have a specialist nurse like what I used to do, and I used to stay in touch with all the recipients and support them through the process, explain things. and we also offered counselling. We had our own internal generalised support group, but there's also an excellent organisation called the Donor Conception Network, and they actually help you not just with what you're going through with treatment, but there's so much more to think about, and this is why it takes time, because you have to think about, well, what happens as a result of a child born from donation? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for the donor? What does that mean for our family? And they provide excellent resources and support every step of the way, which I think is so important.
God, yeah, I mean, it'd be very difficult from both sides, really, because even if the IVF process itself is quite an emotional roller coaster for somebody who's going through that, and then to decide to give eggs and stuff, there's a lot of emotions on both sides, really, aren't there?
There really is, and the idea is that you're supporting your donor and your recipient so that both of them can get the outcome that we want. And whilst it isn't a guarantee, when we see that things work and are successful, it's one of the most amazing gifts that you can give someone, that chance to have a family if that's what they want.
This might be a very, very stupid question.
No such thing.
Because I mean, you think, okay, if I'm going through IVF and I'm going to give an egg as well, so I'm going to have my own child and I'm going to give an egg away. In theory, these are unidentical twins, really. In the end, do the families ever? Do you know who your donor is, or do you sort of?
In the UK, you have a couple of options. If you had what we would refer to as a known donation, so sometimes patients will say, "Oh, my sister has offered to donate." We would screen that donor in the same way as we would an anonymous donor, and the clinic would work that donor through, but you would know that donor and you would both be counselled accordingly. That's quite unusual, because obviously not all family members are able to donate, or can come forward. But also you have the clinic match you. So they will match you with an anonymous donor. So they will tell you when they offer you the donor, oh, this donor's characteristics, hair colour, eye colour, height, weight, build. And the donor can write what we call a pen pal message to tell you a little bit about themselves. And we would just redact any identifying information. Now, the law in the UK and regulations is that any child born as a result of donation can find out any non-identifying information when they're under 16. And once they turn 18, they can find out identifying information, which is held by the clinic or the fertility regulator, the HFEA in the UK. And actually this year is a historic year because the first group of children, since the law changed, will be coming up to their 18th birthday. So the HFEA, the regulator, is really promoting and getting on board that actually some donor conceived children may well be starting to come through and say, I'd like to find out a little bit more about my donor and about where I came from.
Yeah, and whether they have any very closely similar people, the same as them almost.
The important thing is that it's also number of donations are restricted in the UK. It's different across other countries, but in the UK, you can only donate to up to 10 families as a whole. So it's not a case where you see stories in different countries where there's hundreds of donors and things coming forward. We are very well protected with regulation in the UK and supported. And what we find now is, I think the tide is changing. When I first started practicing, nobody wanted to tell anyone. It was a big secret. Don't tell anyone about it was donor eggs or donor sperm. Say nothing, Whereas now people are actually very interested to know where they came from. They understand that the donor has no parental consent for them or financial constraints towards them, but they're interested to know where they came from, and that's important in their journey.
Yeah, absolutely. The excuse me, this is my third cold in literally 3 months.
Oh, don't. I'm the same. I've had the flu before Christmas, COVID, and I've just said to Colin, my Irish housemate, I've got a cold. I think my husband's glad I'm in Ireland so he can't catch
it. Shipping you off.
Yeah, ship her away.
I bet you're healthy. Yeah. All right. So then we get to, given that this is a very emotive area, and people obviously think that there is money to make in it, there is a huge market around this. Let's start with the fertility tests that you can buy online. Are they worth their weight in wallabies, or are we really putting ourselves through an emotional wheel that we don't need to be pushed through?
I like that, worth their weight in wallabies. Now, there are some online tests that are very similar to what you can get at your doctor's. So I would say do your research. Now, you can get some information from the regulator. You can get some information from Fertility Network. I would also say that if you're looking at tests, or you're thinking, well, we've been trying to conceive for a little while, we've made those positive diet and lifestyle changes, but it's still not happening, it's very important to look at both of you, because often we only think about the woman, but actually we need eggs and sperm to make a baby. So we have to look at both of you. And what we also have to think about is where we're going for that test. What does it mean? Now, some companies offer home blood tests that you can take a little sample, a finger prick, send the results. Now, a lot of people use those because it's convenient, but it's actually also having that understanding. What does the test mean? What test am I having? What does it mean? And what does the result mean? And who can help me interpret that result?
So and if you need, because if it comes back and says there's a problem, then surely you really need some sort of, somebody to counsel you through that.
100%, Fiona. So I would always say my first port of call if I see patients is, we've had a consult with me. Depending on which area I'm working in, I can help you with some blood tests and help you interpret those for home, because I don't have a practice in the flesh to speak, or I would guide you to either your GP or an appropriate registered clinic, because that's exactly as you've said. If there are any abnormalities in your results, actually what's most important is you having the support and the information to say, where do we go next? And as you say, there's so many different tests around, and some may not be appropriate to you based on your circumstances, such as your age or what you're planning to do. For example, some couples say, I just want a few tests to find out a little bit more about my fertility. So perhaps a sperm check for my partner if I'm in a relationship, or I'll have a couple of blood tests for me to check my ovarian reserve and some scans, but I don't necessarily want to do anything. Where other couples will say, we want all the tests done and then we want to consider treatment. So actually, it's thinking about what's going to happen on your journey.
Yeah, it's a big call there. Then the other area, this is I'll tell you a little story about an investigative journalist who I used to work with in Australia, very, very smart woman, was having a bit of difficulty conceiving, went to see some sort of homeopath of some description, came into work one day, and I was wondering, why are you walking like this? And it turned out that this homeopath had put 3 little tiny metal balls in her ear. Yes, and had given her some sort of tincture to drink, which is sort of basically some sort of herbs in alcohol, to help boost her fertility. And I was sort of looking at it, I just said, what are you going to do if one of those balls rolls and goes into your ear canal? What are you going to do? How are they going to get that out?
Oh my God.
So I made her take them out on the spot and told her to throw it away and go and see a doctor. Do any of these herbal things work? I mean, I think probably the nastiest one I think I've seen is, and I don't normally argue with people online, but I did have a very large argument with this one, was basically saying we can cure infertility. You take this little herbal suppository and put it into your vagina and your infertility will be gone. It's like, oh, come on. So anyway, are there any things of herbal supplements and things like that can make any difference?
When we think about supplements, the first thing I would say is it's really important to understand they're not regulated to the same standards as medicines. And I say this across whether I'm working in menopause or fertility. So first of all, we have to understand that any medication that you have from the NHS or in the UK has been rigorously tested and regulated and passed appropriate trials. So every bottle you get is the same. But it's like doing your cooking. That plate of spaghetti might not be the same as the next one. So it's understanding that supplements are limited. It doesn't mean that we say they're all off the table. For example, we know supplements like vitamin D can be helpful for overall health. We also know there's some evidence for certain conditions like polycystic ovaries. We may recommend a supplement called inositol that helps with the insulin resistance and to help restore ovulation. But because they're not regulated in the same way, we don't have enough physical evidence and trials to say, Fiona, if we both took that, we'd both get pregnant. The data isn't there, the reliability isn't there. So number one, to do your research. Number two is that in the UK, we're very lucky. We actually have NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence. They have a menopause guideline, but they also have a fertility guideline. So that will tell you, if your couple is option one, this is the recommendations for tests that we'd say. This is the recommendations for treatments, for pathways. So you know that you're getting your evidence-based information. I would never say to patients, I'm telling you not to do that, because it's all about choice. But it's thinking about, where did those supplements come from? What does the evidence tell you? And anyone reputable, you can rightly ask, do you have any data or clinical trials to support your supplementation, or do you have any doctors prescribing them or recommending them? So it's actually doing your research, because I do see some women and they'll turn up with what I always refer to as a coach load of supplements, and I'll think, oh no, because A, it's costly, so they're spending a lot of money, and B, is that right for you? If you've done your research and you want to do that, that's absolutely fine, and that's your choice. But a lot of it, you might be able to also make some really important dietary changes. So it's getting that balance, and it's being smart with your choices. So if I know I've got a condition such as polycystic ovaries, and I know this supplement may be beneficial, and I've talked to the doctor, great, okay. But if I are just looking at sort of, as you say, random things where there's no evidence, that we're not sure, then I would always advise to do your research and be cautious, look at the guidelines, and speak to a clinician.
A couple of the ones that sort of seem to pop up quite regularly are maca, B group vitamins, and I guess, you know, obviously if you're trying to get pregnant, then you want your folic acid and those kinds of things, and your B group things to be any good. But, you know, any evidence for maca, any evidence for it just for generally taking B vitamins?
Not generally, no. I haven't seen. I don't know. I've never recommended a maca supplement for fertility. I would only recommend a vitamin B supplement if the patient had actually had a known deficiency. Because what I would always lean more towards is, well, if you're worried you're not getting enough vitamin B, let's look at your diet, because you're going to absorb things so much better through your diet than me saying have a supplement. Obviously, we know folic acid is clinically proven. It's very important. So I would always advocate, if you're trying to conceive, to make sure that you've started your folic acid, you know, even once you've started to try to conceive. But potentially, as I say, it's using those, it's having valuable resources to go to. The NICE guidelines, the NHS website has some good information. So it's getting that good quality information that you can make an informed decision.
And the folic acid is more really in the end for the spina bifida as opposed to the process of pregnancy, isn't it?
Absolutely. So it's actually evidence that in early pregnancy, it helps to reduce your risk. And if you're worried, we know for ladies with a higher BMI, if you're trying to conceive, you can talk to your doctor about getting a higher dose for folic acid. So we know how to support you with that.
Yeah. The other thing that is, sorry, excuse me, starting to come out now are treatments that claim that they can reverse infertility, such as PRP, which is platelet-rich plasma, where they take your blood, spin it down, get your plasma, and inject it. In this case, they're injecting it into the ovaries. Is there any evidence that that works, or is that just an expensive way of taking money off people for not much hope?
It's an interesting concept. I did a post on this on my Instagram a little while ago, because I'd read some articles on it, and because obviously ladies such as ladies with premature menopause, there's a lot of posts to say that this can rejuvenate your ovaries, you'll become pregnant, and exactly as you said, the idea is that they'll spin the plasma off and then they'll inject it into the ovaries to rejuvenate. And when I looked at the evidence, there were some promising initial trials, but they were very small, because obviously small in numbers doesn't give us a lot of information. And there isn't enough evidence yet to say this is an approved treatment, which is why it's not recommended. So if you're a lady and you're going through a premature menopause, the most successful options for conceiving would still likely to be to consider treatment using donor eggs. What we don't know is what happens in the future. Will they do more tests? Will they do more trials? But I would cautiously advise that we haven't got enough evidence to suggest that as an appropriate treatment yet.
Yes, and I will add in why I actually particularly asked that question is I have Google ads running on my website, and I have no control over them, apart from to say I don't want gambling, or I don't want pornography, or this, that, and the other. So basically, I can rule out a category, but I can't rule out a particular ad. And sometimes when
Are you getting hit with them?
Oh yeah. Sometimes when I open it, something, I think, oh my God, what is that doing there?
And also different countries have different rules and criteria. So I've known of women going abroad to other countries. So I would do your research. I would get several opinions. If you're thinking that's something you'd like to pursue, don't be afraid to get a couple of opinions. Don't be afraid to ask them about their data, because obviously, of course, it's great to go on the positive. Oh, I had a patient that got pregnant, but look at the data. Look at what the guidelines are telling us. Seek a second opinion. Talk to other people who also have your condition. What treatment did they use?
Yeah, exactly. Is there anything else that you think that we should sort of quickly whiz over, or do we think that we've brushed lightly over the important bits?
I loved it. We covered loads of stuff, actually.
That's good.
I love that we're focusing on, as you say, different conditions. And what I would say is, and that's the key, because there's no one size fits all. If you know that you have a particular condition that impacts on your fertility, then supplements may not be the way forward. You may need other treatments. If you know that some supplements may be beneficial, look at your research, make sure that you're getting a reliable area to get them from, talk to your professionals. And also, I think often we don't talk about our fertility journey enough, and actually just having a conversation and talking about options, whether that's like we're doing now, or whether that's talking as in a support group such as Fertility Network. Know that there's support out there. There's Beaker, the British Infertility Counselling Association, who can direct you to specially trained counsellors. And know that if you are having treatment in a licensed clinic in the UK, it is mandatory that they have a counsellor to offer support for you. And know that there's lots of support here. So what you're doing, Fiona, you're getting the word out, you're answering questions, you're looking and thinking, I've got that weird advert, that's not right. And you're thinking, we need to know more about that. We need to spread the word. That's the way to think about it.
Yeah, true. And I think also the other thing you do, because you probably feel an awful lot of shame if you can't get pregnant. It's like, oh, what's wrong with me? And you probably don't want to reach out and talk to other people. The number of people who I know who haven't had children who feel that I have one, and I've even had people sort of say to me, well, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you have a second? And those sorts of things. You got this sort of like almost like you're a failure if you don't have these things, and nothing could be further from the truth. So
very much so. Often women will say, well, I'm always asked when I'm having children or why I'm not having children. It's kind of, people feel it's non-intrusive, and they can ask you specific things about your life choices or your fertility. So it can be quite a lonely and isolating experience. You might not feel comfortable talking to your friends or your colleagues or your family. So know that there's support out there. As I've mentioned, there's some great podcasts out there. The Fertility podcast is fantastic because you can tune into different podcasts, so you can think, oh, that's really relevant to me right now. And there's such a big support on Instagram and in the community, so that you won't feel alone. And I think things are slowly changing, Fiona, on a positive. Before I left my permanent clinic role, I was talking to a lady and she told her employer, she'd made plans. Whereas if I went back 10, 15 years, it was all, I've not told anyone, I'm just coming in, don't tell anyone. So I think things are changing. There's great campaigns out there, Fertility Matters at Work for employment, Fertility Network. So I think things are changing, but there's always more work to be done, and that's why we're here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if people want to find you, darling, where do they find you?
If they can find me on Instagram at fertility_menopause_support. I'm a bit of an enigma that I do both, but that's because I specialise in premature menopause as well, and I love doing both. It's me, and I am also on Facebook, and I do have a website, but that's all on my Instagram. So find my page and hang out. But I could talk for England. So if you've got any more things you want to talk about, as usual, lovely, you know where I am.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. We shall leave it there. And this will go to the YouTube. It will go to the, it's already, as soon as I finish this, it'll be sitting there so people can come back and find it again.
Wow.
And we should be talking now live on Facebook and Twitter. So brilliant. And I will chop it up and I will put bits on the Instagram as well, so people can refer back to it. And we shall leave it there. And thank you very, very much. And if anybody is watching, tell your friends, subscribe, so then you'll know when the next ones are coming up. The next time Kate is back, you'll know. Yay.
Thanks, Fiona. Lovely talking to you. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.